Yes, and welcome everybody. And maybe, do you want to do the introduction, Eva?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Hello and good morning. Welcome everyone to this Q&A session by Philanthropia. We run a lot of online courses and webinars, and what we always notice is that after every webinar you have a lot of questions for us. Sometimes we don't have enough time to answer all of them because we have our content to get through, etc. So we've started to establish these Q&A sessions where you can ask any questions related to resource mobilization, project management, etc. And today it's even the two of us, it's Eric and me, answering your questions. So we hope that we can give you a comprehensive view on everything. Just a quick introduction again to Philanthropia. We are a consulting company. We have our fundraising institute with many online courses and other resources. So if you want to learn more about any of the specifics of, for example, proposal writing, or something like a very specific topic like fundraising from USAID or the European Commission or American foundations, etc., please check out philanthropia.org, and you will find the page of the Fundraising Institute with all the courses and many more resources that I think we will keep referencing throughout this day, because we've already poured a lot of work into putting all the information out there. We have collected some questions beforehand through email, but you also have the opportunity to ask us here. You see the Q&A box at the bottom, and we would ask you to use that for questions. You can use the chat to talk to each other, to network, etc. But it's a bit difficult for us to keep track. So for questions that you want us to answer, we would ask you to use the Q&A box. Just a very quick introduction of us. Maybe you, Eric, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eva, for the comprehensive introduction. And just about very quickly about myself, I've been, and you've probably seen me on some of the training videos, and I've seen my name floating around and my face on some of the instructional videos that we have. And very quickly, I've been fundraising for well over 20 years. I fundraised for nearly every country in the world for a wide variety of different thematic areas, including children's rights, education, immunization, WASH, you name it. I've fundraised for it. And from thousands and thousands of different types of donors. So I very much look forward to sharing my experiences with you today. And also, you can learn from my mistakes. I made many mistakes over the years, and you learn from those. And fundraising is, you know, a lot of closed doors, a lot of no's. And but you have to keep on going, be persistent, and then success comes. So a very warm welcome. And as Eva said, we already got a bunch of questions via email. And I think it's well over 20 or 25 questions. So we have a lot of material to discuss today, and we have a limited amount of time. But feel free to join every time we run a live webinar, Q&A, expert session, Facebook Live. You know, we do many. And we always welcome you to any of those. And I think if we do not get to your question, we will try to put some of these questions into like resource guides or blog posts and try and answer them that way. So keep checking the website to see if there's new resources there that are useful. And yeah, probably there will be too many questions to answer all today, but we'll try our very best. Okay, where should we start, Eva, or will Preeti?
No, I will
Okay,
read
great.
the questions. I'll start going through the questions. So there's a lot of very specific questions asking us for where can we find a grant for working with children in Kenya or for Asian countries, etc. So I think instead of going through all these questions individually, maybe it's a good idea to just give you a rundown of the easiest techniques to do donor research, because that is a skill that makes a lot of sense to develop within your organization. So instead of giving you a list, which is also impossible because we don't know enough about your project, we will start by talking a bit about donor research and how you can actually find a good donor fit. And maybe I can just start by, again, addressing this issue that some of you ask us, well, where can we find a donor for children's issues in Kenya? And that isn't even enough information, because one of the most important things about donor research that you kind of have to understand is that it has to be the perfect fit. So just putting out there broad terms like children and a country or even a continent isn't going to land you that perfect donor fit that will then maybe fund you. So you have to really dig deeper in your research to find a partner that funds in your area, funds the issues that you want to solve, that has the same mission, has the same values, funds your activities, etc. So it's a process. We have developed checklists for this that really help you to go through to find a perfect donor fit, because only if you spend that time collecting intelligence, collecting information, and finding that perfect fit, you actually have a good chance. Because if it's very broad, first of all, the competition will be really, really high. And second of all, it won't be your perfect fit. So putting in a little bit more work, gathering information about your project and then finding that perfect donor fit is a key step here. And maybe Eric can talk a bit about techniques to find donors, things that you can easily do to get there to find potential donors.
Yeah, those are all very good points. Let me start by saying there are hundreds of thousands of donors in the world. And when I talk about donors, I don't talk about individuals. I talk about institutional donors. So foundations, trusts, CSR programs, or multilaterals, bilaterals, so government, development, official development assistance from places like that. So with just the United States alone has well over 150,000 grant-giving foundations, and quite a few of those will be interested, of course, not all of them, it will be a small slice, will be interested in what you do and the country where you work. So if you're working on, we have one organization with us today, they work on primary education in schools in Nepal. And I know there are quite a few foundations in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere that are interested in that type of work. So, but there is, out of those hundreds of thousands of potentials of funders in the world, you have to find and shortlist maybe the 30, 40, or 50 that are really good fits with your organization, like Eva already mentioned. And my suggestion, my go-to technique initially is always to look at the competition. I don't really like the word competition because we're all trying to make a better world, right? But your peers, your colleague organizations, if there is an organization in your country or maybe several organizations doing the same type of work. So for example, primary education in Nepal, then I would check their website, their annual reports, etc., and see who funds them. Because if they're funding an organization in your country for the same type of work, that donor may well be interested in also funding you. There's no reason they would only fund one NGO in a country. Often they fund multiple organizations. And I have found that in many cases, most organizations, most NGOs nowadays do have a website. And in quite a few cases, you will find a support, our supporters, our partners, on either on the website or in an annual report or something along those lines. So that's my go-to. And we have a video on the website called Finding 50 Donors in 10 Minutes. And it showcases that technique. And it's actually the video is like 12 or 13 minutes. So it's not really 10, but look at that. And it'll give you, and I run through kind of hands-on how you can find 50 donors in 10 minutes. And maybe it will take you not 10 minutes because I've been doing it a long time. I can do that very quickly, but maybe it will take you an hour, a few hours to develop that initial list. And again, there are many other options available to you. Obviously, our website does have resources, some lists of donors, etc. And also we operate donordatabase.org. And it is, we have a database of, I think there's close to 10,000 donor profiles in there. In the example I'm using, if you would select Nepal as the country where, the money should go to, the grant should go to, and primary education or education, you'll get pages and pages of good results. And then you can research those further to come to develop your shortlist. So these are all some good go-to techniques. I also think there are some others that you can do. There are other databases around the world. We have lots of training videos, fundraising from US foundations, fundraising from European foundations, fundraising from government, fundraising from the European Commission, et cetera, et cetera. So look at some of those resources, look at some of those videos. I think it'll give you a lot of direction. At the same time, the research, the donor research, donor mapping, or prospecting, some people call it, is extremely important. It's your first step. If you do not put enough time and effort into researching donors and coming up with a short list, you're not going to be very successful. Your success rate is going to be very low or zero, basically. So we do with Philanthropia, and together with Eva and the entire team, we do a lot of donor mapping, because if somebody needs additional funding, the first step is the donor mapping, is to create that list. Because if you do not know who to connect with, who to engage with, what donor to try to convince that your program is worth funding, your success rate will be very, very low. And then the last point is that to engage with donors, you do need to do that research. You need to find people at those agencies, at the foundations, etc. And also important is that many donors do not give through a request for proposals or published opportunities on a website like ours or others. It's through negotiation. So by knowing donors and being proactive, you can really you can build that relationship and you can be successful. So again, great questions. Thanks. Eva, what else do we have?
Thank you. Yeah, so we have a couple of questions in the chat now. I'll get to them in a second, but there was one very interesting question that was submitted beforehand, which was about artificial intelligence and fundraising. So I think that is a very interesting field because artificial intelligence just changes so many things at the moment. The question we got was, are AI tools currently used by donors to shortlist candidates? But I think it's also very interesting to look at the other side on like how you can maybe use AI in your fundraising efforts. And just to start, maybe I can give my perspective and then Eric will add to that. Just starting to this question, do donors use AI? I think this speaks to the importance of when you send a proposal, really following the guidelines and checking all those formal boxes, because I think that is what AI can do at the moment. It cannot say a lot about contents, but I think what happens as it also happens when you apply for a job, they can scan proposals to decide if they adhere to the formal guidelines, which tells you again how important they are. We've looked at statistics here in Germany, and even from the big organizations that send proposals, 30% fail because they don't adhere to the formal guidelines. So formal guidelines means like the length of the proposal, not making it too long. Sometimes you can't even put in more words, but that is a criterion. If the donor says write 1,000 words and you write 1,005, they will not read your proposal. And I think AI is going to be used to weed those out. And that just speaks to the importance of really following those guidelines again. And because AI tools are not going to be forgiving at all, because they will just count, they will just look at the things, there's boxes that need to be ticked. And if they're not ticked, no human will ever read your proposal. And those guidelines, I think, are in place because of the volume that donors receive. No, sometimes when there's an open call, there will be thousands of proposals, and there's simply not the human resources at the donors' offices to read through all those proposals. So they have to adhere to those guidelines. And obviously AI is a huge help there, because then you don't even have to have a human ticking the boxes, but a machine. But then again, there's no room for error. So you have to follow those guidelines to the T, because otherwise your proposal will get checked out before anybody ever touched it. So again, guidelines are crucial here. And I think that is what AI is used on that side of the pipeline at the moment. On the other side, when you write proposals or do donor research, AI can also be a huge help to you if you learn to use it now. So there's potential, there's also risk associated with it. So you always have to look at it with a grain of salt. But we did some experiments, for example, doing donor research with Chat. I always get those initials wrong, Chat GTP, right? Or GPT, the thing where you put in words and it answers you. You can ask it as well, who could be good donors for my project in Nepal and education? And they will give you a list. But beware, because sometimes they make up stuff. So we had the question, who are good donors in Bavaria? And the first 3 ones were foundations that fund in Bavaria. The 4th one was made up completely, didn't exist. So I think there's the risk that at the moment, those machines are making stuff up if they don't have an answer. So anything you use, anything you do with those machines, you always have to double and triple check if it's correct, because often it doesn't tell you where it took the information from, and often it makes stuff up if it doesn't have the answer. But it can still give you some very good ideas, especially if you're not, if English is not your mother tongue. You can also you can write a text and put it into this machine and say, write this in a different tone, write this more formal, etc. And it will give you some suggestions. So it can help you with editing your text. There's also some specific services already that can help you with actually writing a proposal, because it's like sitting on top of it kind of, and you put in the correct information and it gives you a proposal draft. All those things can be helpful, but you have to be super vigilant, I think, because they can also put mistakes in there. So you really have to double and triple check anything you do with those machines, because there's no guarantee that it's correct. But as long, I think, as you are vigilant, you can use the tools that are out there to help you reach out, for example, to help you draft the cover letter. If you have issues with that, you can always tell them, no, use a different tone, make it more colloquial, make it more formal, and you can get some ideas for how to put something and maybe use that in the future, again, especially if English is not your mother tongue. So I think there's huge potential. It also needs to be developed. Still, there's a lot of work that still goes into this, and we see with every version of those services that come out, they get better. But yeah, you don't just put something in and copy and take it, but always check and check and check if it's correct. So I think there's those 2 sides, and I think the field is just developing so quickly that maybe if we do this webinar or if we talk about this topic in 6 months again, we will have something very different to say about it. But from my perspective at the moment, that is the potential that I currently see, especially for small NGOs.
Maybe in 6 months, you won't see us, but you'll see a computer-generated person answering questions.
Yeah.
Although I think it might be take a bit longer than that. But those are all very good points. I do think, yes, in proposal writing, also in writing blog posts and social media posts and stuff for your website. Maybe annual report, etc. There's very good utility there, but again, the quality varies, and the more specific the assignment. And we've been investigating. We've been working a little bit with Chat GPT, I think, and it's quite amazing what it can do. But it's like Eva said, there's also mistakes. And there are limitations to it. But I could imagine if a lot of donors will ask for indicators. You know, if you develop a proposal, what are the indicators you're going to use to show us that you're successful? And I can imagine if you put in a search assignment, something like, please give me 10 good impact indicators or KPIs for primary education programming in the country of Nepal. I bet you that artificial intelligence will give you a list that's quite, of which a few are very, very useful. And so it may save you time. Or if you're looking for statistics, how many people live in a certain area of the world? Normally you would use Google, but with artificial intelligence, you can put in a request that writes a complete article one pager on the statistics and etc. of a certain area of the world, or primary school aged children in a certain part of Nepal. But again, you have to verify. There's also things artificial intelligence can't yet do. For example, I tried just recently to see if ChatGPT could come up with funding opportunities for WASH and water and sanitation programming in a certain country. It can't do that. The database looks at information up to, I believe, at the moment, 2021. So something that is time sensitive, like a job, a funding opportunity, and where there's a specific window in which you have to apply, those it won't be able to find. But if you ask it, hey, ChatGPT, can you give me a list of donors too, like Eva mentioned, or can you provide me websites that provide lists of funding opportunities or a database of funding opportunities? It does do pretty well with that. Not great, but it does do pretty well, and in some ways better than Google or the search engines are doing. So I think we'll see more and more of it. Are donors using it? They probably are, but we're investigating kind of how that works, and we haven't seen, or there hasn't been much reporting on it yet. So we are currently writing an article on innovation in fundraising, both from the perspective of donors, like how are they using innovation and artificial intelligence in identifying organizations they want to work with, and from the perspective of the NGO, the organization looking for funding. And that article should come out over the next few weeks or so, and we'll update that as we go. So, okay, great. That's a very interesting question indeed.
Yeah, I'm not muted. So we are getting a couple of questions in the Q&A box as well. So Amy is asking about learning more on M&E and its importance, because their organization has limited human resources, and that's always a struggle. Yeah, this is something that we also obviously notice, that this is an issue that keeps coming up, because you have to design something as well during the application process. So all this thought goes into it, even when it's not like 100% part of the resource mobilization. It's more in project management, but it's very, very important. We actually do have an online course about designing a log frame on our site, so you can check that out if you want more information about that. But in general, I think it's many people are a bit scared of kind of designing the log frame, and I can really understand that, because I had the same feeling in the beginning. But the more and more, it's just a very logical way of describing the project in a different form. So I think if your project, if you put in the time of developing great projects, when you develop a project plan, it's much easier for you if you already follow the categories that you need to follow. It's very easy for you to then translate that into a log frame later. So developing those skills within your organization, also skills of developing great projects that already follow this intervention logic that donors will later have, is really crucial. So often we see when organizations approach us that they say, can you train our fundraisers? But we actually believe that it makes a lot of sense to look at this a bit more holistically, and also talk to project managers, because if the project managers already present you with a project plan that kind of ticks all those boxes and translates very well into a log frame, it's easier for you, it's easier for the project managers and everybody. So those are things that kind of everybody in the team has to learn about to be more effective, because then you don't have to spend all that time trying to translate something that doesn't translate, but usually then it's much easier. And also if you have limited resources, it's not going to eat up that much of your time.
Yeah, good points. I think monitoring and evaluation is very, very important, and in some ways an extension of fundraising as well. Because if a donor provides you with funding, they would like to know that you're monitoring what you're doing and adjusting the program as you go to make sure it has the maximum impact and reaches the maximum number of people, for example. And they want to know at the end, in an evaluation, what's the outcome? What happened with our money? How did it impact the people that the funding was used for? So in reporting to the donor, most donors require a report at the end of the project, and M&E is a very important component of that. Now, there's different parts of M&E, and I think if you're monitoring and then later evaluating, you need good indicators. And I mentioned indicators already, and how to use maybe artificial intelligence to come up with a good list of indicators. And the short answer of coming up with indicators are that there are basically two types of indicators, output and impact indicators. And output indicators are very easy to report on. If, for example, you run a workshop and 20 people are supposed to participate, then the indicator is 20 people, how many people participated in the workshop. And then the result would be, okay, 20 people did participate, completed the workshop. So that's proof that the activity, the workshop for 20 people took place, and that 20 people were trained in the workshop. These types of indicators, basically the activity completed, are called output indicators, and they're very easy to measure. 50 children reached, 600 notebooks delivered to a school, a radio program produced and aired on the radio, all that type of stuff. A well dug, and there's water coming out. So those are simple. But the impact indicators, and donors would like to see impact indicators as well, are more difficult. Because, you train maybe 20 people, but did they learn something? Are they doing something different in their day-to-day work? You delivered 600 notebooks to a primary school somewhere for the children to use in their lessons, but are the children using them? Or did the notebooks end up in the community being used for something else? Or were they sold or something like that, right? So impact is more difficult, but we do have quite a lot of resources on it. And we have the logical framework course. And I see that Preeti has the link is in the webinar chat box, but it's easy to find on the website as well. So I think in the future we will develop some additional resources on M&E and how to develop an M&E plan, and also how it links to developing, to engaging with the donor, because M&E is a good opportunity to engage and build a relationship with the donor, and also to show them how what great work you are doing, right? And why you need more funding, why it's such a good idea to give you more money to have more impact. So things like that are very important, and that's a very good question. And we're definitely going to develop additional resources on it, and maybe we'll run a Q&A on M&E one of these days, and we'll look into that. So yeah, great, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, then we have another question and comment that makes me actually very happy, because Theophilus says that thanks to some of our sessions, they were able to get their concept note shortlisted. So that's amazing. That's always great to hear this feedback. And if any of you have experienced that using some of our resources, attending webinars, learning about these things actually helped you so much that you had something accepted, we would always love to hear about that. So if you have a story like that, please reach out to info@philanthropia.org and let us know. Yeah, because it makes us very happy, and it's also something we would love to share, because we try to always make the most resources as possible available to you for free, and we love to hear that it's helpful, and we would love to share this information as well to let others know that this is very helpful. So yeah, yay for you, congratulations, that's amazing. And the attached question is what advice can we give to help through the second stage, the full proposal stage, successfully? Maybe you can start, Eric.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And my typical advice would be, of course, it depends a little bit on the donor, the requirements, what the funding is for, etc. But usually, if you make it to the short list, you're usually in very good company. And the competition then is much less, because I've done some research on the European Commission funding, and when they when they have like a global call for proposals, let's say for human rights or something, they may get 500, 600 or 1,000 applications, so concept notes. So it's like the short 4-pager basically. And out of those, they may only select 10 or 20, a very small number. So if you make it past the first hurdle, then you are in a very small group, and your chances are pretty significant that you will get funding. You're in a good position. And what it also means at the first stage, where they look at the concept note, or yeah, sometimes it's called letter of inquiry, or something different. But if they've decided that they like what they read, and that they want you to develop a full proposal, that means that, in short, that the work you do and the program you are presenting is something they want to fund. So, and that has to do with that you're eligible, but also that it's relevant. So, for example, if a donor wants programs on climate change in East Africa, I'm just using it as an example, and you show up with a program on education in India, you're going to be chucked out. They're not asking for that. They're asking for work on climate change in East Africa. So if you develop a concept note, a 4-pager or what have you, that addresses climate change in East Africa, and it seems like you're a quality NGO, then your chances of getting to the next round are much, much greater. And if you do make it to the next round, that's an indication that the donor has decided this NGO is doing the work I want to do. This NGO is trying to solve a problem I want to solve as a donor. A donor is not like a bank. A donor has an objective, a mission, a goal, and the money is just is secondary to that. The money is used to achieve a goal. Protecting children, educating children, building resilience against climate change, and things like that. So they're not a bank. They're trying to reach a goal. They're trying to make a better world, right? To have impact. But they need NGOs to do that. They need you to do that. So when they have a goal, for example, we want to solve or address climate change in East Africa, if you're an NGO addressing that problem, and you're a good NGO with good programming, then your chances of making it to the next round are really are good. And if you make it to the next round, then they've already determined that the problem you're trying to solve, climate change in East Africa, in my example, is what they want to solve. So in the full proposal, you don't have to put as much emphasis on that anymore. The full proposal then is, okay, we are very interested in the type of work you do, and we might want to fund you. Can you please let us know how you're going to do it? So the full proposal, the emphasis typically is much more on the quality of the NGO. How much experience do you have? How many people are you going to reach? What is the cost? And in a full proposal with a fully worked out budget, etc., usually there will be much, much more detail on the number of people you're reaching, etc. And then they can make a calculation. Oh, they're asking for $100,000 and they're going to reach 1,000 people. So that's $100 per person, reached. They will make calculations like that. So at that point, it's more about presenting the program, the quality of the program, and the quality of the NGO. At the concept note stage, the first step, it's more about making sure you're eligible and making sure that the problem you want to solve is the problem they want to solve, that you're relevant, that it's relevant. So I hope that makes sense. We have a course on European Commission, fundraising from the European Commission and developing the concept now. And if you have access, look at that one, because I go in quite a lot of detail on how that kind of works, the two-phase proposal system with the concept note and the full proposal. And great news, Theo, that you made it to the next round. That's really great. And fingers crossed, I think. How do you do that? Like that? That you get funded. But in any case, it means you have a very high quality concept note and you can reutilize that for other donors as well. I think so. Even in the end, if you're not successful, we're hoping you are, of course, and I'm sure you're worth it. But even if not, then the experience gained and the project concept note developed and the full proposal, you can reutilize that with other donors. I think your success rate will go up. So thanks.
Thank you. So we have another question by Tara. And she mentions that she has been using AI to edit the language. And the question is, how correctly do we need to be grammatically on the proposal? Do you think our success rate decreases if we have a few mistakes here and there? So yeah, I think that's it depends a bit. I think a very few mistakes here and there are not a big problem. But I also think that donors look at language and look at the amount of care that you put into a proposal as an indicator for how you would work later. So if it's clear that English or whichever language you're applying in is not your mother tongue, and there's a couple of small mistakes, I think that's not a big problem. But if there's many, and if there's like a big typo on the front page, then that can become more problematic, because as I said, I think they look at this as an indicator of how much care you will also put into your project work. If you're careless, if it looks like it's careless. Of course, it's almost impossible if you write a 20-page proposal to have no mistakes in there. Even editors have mistakes. You can find mistakes in the New York Times. So it will happen. And if it's just small typos here and there, I don't think it's a big thing. But if it's so noticeable that it's difficult to read the whole thing or something like that, I think it will reflect negatively. Again, not because they don't understand you, but because they think, if they didn't even spend the time on the proposal to proofread a couple of times, will they then be doing great work in the project? Is that a reflection of the project work or not? So what we recommend is always proofreading if possible. If you have an outsider, proofread as well, also for a red thread, because if we are in like if we do project work, sometimes we think, oh, this is clear, we don't have to explain, and we're missing like a step in the process. Or sometimes, specifically if more than one person work on one proposal, things get deleted and then it's missing. And if you are like up to here in the project, you might not notice, because to you everything is clear. So it makes sense to have an outsider, maybe someone not working in your project, or maybe even not working in your organization, to proofread, to see if there's any logical gaps in your proposal as well. This is something that you can use volunteers for. That's always a question we get. Can we outsource proposal writing? No, you shouldn't. That's a skill you should develop internally. But if you have volunteers, they're great to support in proofreading, for example. And I think you should be as careful as possible, but obviously nobody will ever create the perfect document with no mistakes at all. And I think there's some cultural differences as well. Maybe Eric can speak to that in the US it looks a bit different than maybe in the Netherlands or in Denmark if you apply there.
Yeah, those are good, very good points. I think also check out Proposals for NGOs, our sister website. It's full of sample proposals. It's full of tips and tricks. It's full of guides. We have an entire book with hundreds of pages worth of information on how to write perfect proposals. And of course, we have many, many courses on the Philanthropia platform. And I do think spelling mistakes are almost they're not really necessary anymore. I think with a good spell checker in Google Docs or Word, MS Word or whatever, you can weed out most of those. Also, there's some grammar assistance, you know, it will provide you some suggestions on how to improve the language. So I think you can probably weed out quite a lot. Like Eva said, if you can use a volunteer and somebody with very strong English, I guess, language skills, or a volunteer that is a native English speaker, that will help a great deal. You can easily find somebody to help out, I think. If you go, for example, I've done work with UN volunteers. They have a platform, a website, UNV, the United Nations Volunteers Program. They're based in Bonn in Germany, but they have an online website where volunteers can offer services, and NGOs that need help can also put, can request a volunteer. And there are people around the world that are retired, that are fantastic, you know, writers, editors, that may be willing to help you, and that find it important to help NGOs in other countries. So that's always a good idea. Now, I think, like Eva said, yes, if your application goes to the US, then they're pretty, my kind of experience, and I lived in New York for 20 years, and we still have a company there, right? And I travel there often. And I fundraise from a lot of US foundations and the US government, etc. They're sticklers kind of for grammar and spelling. So it's quite important. And of course, it's their native language, right? English. So if you send an application to maybe, I don't know, Switzerland or Belgium or the English, or Sweden, the English language skills there will probably also be quite high amongst donors. But they're more forgiving typically, and they because they're not native English speakers themselves. Also, if you really struggle, my suggestion is maybe to connect with the donor before applying and tell them, you know, build that relationship, which I think is very important in any case. Just sending a proposal or concept note without ever having connected or spoken to the donor is not usually such a great idea, in my view. You want to build a relationship. You want to see what is it that you want as a donor, what are the important priorities for you over the next few years. And in engaging with that donor, you can also explain, listen, English is not our native language, and we struggle with that a little bit. And is it, you know, how important is it is that a disqualification if there's some grammar mistakes here and there? In most cases, if you reach out and you ask, they'll tell you, and I think in most cases they'll be more than happy to read your proposal and will look past some of the minor mistakes. But again, go to Proposals for NGOs, go to philanthropia.org. We have lots and lots of resources out there. And does AI, like Google Translate or whatever, how do they do a good job in translating? In general, it's a mixed bag, I think. I think it's a good maybe start, and it's getting better and better. But with technical terms, sometimes there are mistakes. I think it's a good resource to use, and it may help save you time, but somebody still manually will have to review it, edit it, rewrite it, is my suggestion. Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of very broad questions by Stephen. What are donor interests and strategies? And what would be the right format? And obviously, there's no one answer to those questions. It depends on every single donor. So that is why we always emphasize that research is so important, because every donor wants to see something else. They all have, like, you all have different theories of change. You all have different missions that and ideas of how you want to go about your work. It's the same for the different donors. So that's why this research phase is so important, to collect all that intelligence, because even if you have the same mission or vision, for example, if you work in education, you can still go about fostering education in very different ways. One NGO maybe wants to build a school, so then they have to look for a donor whose strategy is building infrastructure. So that's what they want to support. Somebody else maybe goes and says, well, there's a school here, so we would like to support teacher training. So that NGO then would have to look for a donor who works in education, so that's the same, but who follows a different strategy of funding training. So that always depends on the donor. There's no one correct answer to this. You always have to go check the websites, ideally talk to people, organize meetings, network, get to know them, to understand what their goal is, what their values are, what their theory of change is, because that kind of needs to match with yours, not always 100%, but it needs to be the same direction, because otherwise they will either not fund you, or they will fund you, but you don't want to really implement that project. That also happens, that sometimes NGOs kind of bend their proposal in the way that it fits for the donor, but then it doesn't really adhere to their own theory of change anymore. And we call that mission creep, which happens when you kind of adjust your program too much just to be liked by donors. That's also not good. So that's why it is so important that you know your theory of change, and then go out and research others that have the same, and not trying to adjust your work to what others want. No, so you need to know exactly what your organization's way of working is, what you want to do, and then you go out, do that research, find out about donors' interests and strategies, etc., and find a good match where you can apply in the next step. And sorry, like Eric also mentioned, we have a lot of resources also about how to develop a theory of change on proposals4ngos.com, our partner page, and all these things, how to find that perfect donor match, what to look out for, etc. So there's a lot of resources that we have published about this, because it is so crucial that you do those steps and understand, the interests and strategies of donors, which are different in every case.
Yeah, all very good points. I think also important is the most important, Eva mentioned, and that's ask the donor. What do they want? What do they want in the program? You know, what is the problem they want to solve, of course, but also what do they want to see in the proposal? And do they have a format? If it's not on the website, if it's not clear, ask them. Most donors will respond if you ask a technical question like that. Maybe they have sample proposals or proposals that were submitted previously by other NGOs that they can share. So you can see an example of a successful proposal that was submitted earlier. Maybe they're willing to give you some direction, some tips and tricks. You would be surprised that there are donors that are very, very open to receiving email, to having a quick talk, or to point you in the right direction. Not all of them, but many do. So that's important, because obviously the closer you get to what it is they want to see in a proposal, the more likely it is that they'll take your application seriously. Now, a couple of my other kind of tips and tricks. I think it's always good to write it assuming that the donor, the person, there's a person sitting there reading it. The donor is not like a machine or a computer. There's an individual person sitting behind the desk reading your application. And that person might have to read 100 applications and decide which 2 or 5 or 10 make it to the next round or are going to get funded. So that can be a little bit tedious. Can you imagine reading thousands and thousands of pages of projects, most of which you're never going to fund? That can be a bit tedious. And so my suggestion is make it interesting. Tell stories. If you can include quotes, if you can include a case study, if you can include a story of somebody you helped, a child in a school or a woman who doesn't have to fetch water anymore, walking 20 miles every day to get water, or whatever it is you do, make it real. You're probably helping people or animals or, you know, things like that. You have beneficiaries. Tell the donor about them, why it is important that the help that you provide, the programs you run, that they continue. Stuff like that really helps quite a lot, I think, because sometimes proposals are too dry, too formal, they don't really paint a picture, they don't really tell a story. And some of those techniques can really improve your chances of success. So those are some basic tips. But one other thing, the KISS methodology, keep it short and simple. And sometimes I see proposals that are 40 pages long, and they could have presented it in 10 or 15 pages. It's not necessary to make it as long as possible. If you keep it a bit shorter, to the point, succinct, it'll be easier for the donor to read, to go through it quickly and decide whether or not they want to continue with your application. And so don't give them extra work if they don't, if it's not necessary. And that sometimes is difficult. Don't throw everything in the kitchen sink in your proposal, but keep it on point, you would say. But these are great questions, and we have lots of free resources for you on across our platforms that can help you develop a wonderful, great proposal that really can have impact.
Yeah, so we actually do have another question in the chat about exactly this. How long should a proposal be, especially in cases where it's not indicated? And yeah, I think Eric already spoke to that. I also always say it needs to be as long as necessary and as short as possible at the same time, because yeah, you do want to respect donors' time, yours as well, because it takes a lot of time to write all those pages. Often that is not necessary. So really trying to focus on the important things, not leaving anything out, but covering everything in the shortest and most succinct way is a great start. And I think what also really helps to keep those proposals a bit shorter is if you spend the time to actually develop a great project plan first. Because there's another question, so maybe we can also combine those. Somebody asking, they have a new, Adele asking, there's a new established NGO in Nepal, but we don't have any idea about how to develop a project and what to do there. We actually have a lot of resources on that. We have a webinar, how to develop a project plan that you can also find on our YouTube channel. So after this, I also recommend you check out the YouTube channel and subscribe, because all of these free resources are uploaded there. But if you spend the time to actually write a really very good project plan where you follow the structure that we give and you kind of fill out all those sections, answer all the questions that a project plan needs to answer, which are basically those W questions that we learn at school, like who wants to do what, where, when, how, and why. If you answer all of that, you already have a great structure that you can then use to write your proposal, because we noticed many times that people confuse in the proposal the activities with the impact. So when you're asked what are your objectives and what are your activities, those are two different sections. But I would say 70% of proposals I read, those two sections have the same information, because people don't distinguish properly between the actual activities and the things that will happen next. So the impact those activities will have. And that is where most start rambling. And you kind of notice, like the background is clear, the justification is very clear, and then it starts going to all directions because the distinctions are not clear. And I think first writing a great project plan, using a couple of the tools that we offer you, following a very clear impact logic, etc., helps you a lot to then translate that into a succinct proposal, because then you know, okay, this section goes here and this section goes there, and you don't kind of mash up everything and start to mumble and start to just fill in words because you're not 100% sure what goes where. We also have this proposal resource guide. I think the link was already shared in the comments, that talks a lot about the meaning of those different terms, because one of the main reasons I think why the proposals get longer and longer is because every section has the same information. Like even in the introduction, people talk about beneficiaries, and then in the beneficiary section, they talk about beneficiaries again, and a little bit more of that information gets mixed into the impact section again. If you are clear on the terms, and if you understand what each term, each section of the proposal that you have to fill out means, then you only put that information there, and by default your proposal is shorter because you are on the point. If you're not clear about the terminology, you try to fit everything wherever it fits, and that is what makes them like bloated and makes them much longer. So following the terminology, following the steps, having a project plan, all of that really helps you to translate that into a succinct document that is on the point and that doesn't confuse the donor, I think.
Yeah, that's all true. And I think a couple of, about length. Sometimes I have one example, or I applied to the UN Democracy Fund, and a few years ago was successful in the end. So that was great news. But they get about I think maybe it's 4,000 or 5,000 applications. At that time, it was 3,000 a year. And you had an online template you had to fill in. And like program activities, you only had 500 characters. And it included spaces and periods and stuff like that. So, and then a description of the NGO, you know, of your organization, 300 characters. And 300 characters, I think that's around, that's 3 lines of text, something 2 or 3 sentences, very, very little. And it was difficult to make, to develop something that made sense, that was that short. It was altogether, all the text was less than a page, and you had to describe the entire program, your organization, and everything around it on that one page, basically. And it was being very short and to the point is just as difficult as you know, creating a 50-page document sometimes. So, but yeah, what Eva says is true. Make it, keep it organized, keep it as short as possible, but still, you know, not so short that it doesn't make sense anymore, obviously, or is unclear. And again, ask the donor. Many donors have guidelines, either it's on the website, and they will explain what the maximum length is, or they will provide a format. For example, the European Commission, the concept note for the European Commission is 4 pages maximum. So if you send in 5 pages, they won't even look at it. It could be the best proposal they've ever received, with the greatest impact and the most wonderful things included. But if you send them 5 pages, they chuck you out. They don't care anymore. You know, they're not going to read it. You didn't follow the guidelines. If it is not clear, then typically my suggestion is send something short, like a 2-page or 4-page or concept note as a first kind of step. Because why develop a 10, 20, 40-page full proposal if you're not even sure that the donor is interested? It's a lot of work writing huge proposals with all the bells and whistles. So do something that is short and submit that and say, well, this is a summary outline of the program we want to run and the problems we want to solve, etc. And then if they're interested, then you can develop a full proposal. So again, donors have limited time. They get, I read somewhere that the Gates Foundation gets about 3,000, and this is a few years ago, so maybe now it's 5,000 requests for funding every day, not every year, every day. Ford Foundation, I think it must be 30 to 40,000 applications they get every year. And maybe it's more, actually. So can you imagine the volume? And there are individuals, there are people that have to go through that and make a determination who they're going to continue the discussion with and who they're going to fund in the end. So make it easy for them. They'll thank you for it. Okay, there's one question here about regaining trust, Eva, and I think we'll very quickly take that, because that's an interesting one. And then I think we may have to wrap up.
Yeah. So the question is how to regain trust of donors due to poor performance or unsuccessful in completing a past project. What are the options here? Maybe I'll just give some quick ideas and then I'll pass it over to you. I just want to say that's the first thing I thought of. I think this speaks to the importance of keeping in touch with the donor. We always say that that it's always, you can run into issues when you implement a project, but the earlier you communicate those problems and the closer you are in exchange with the donor, also throughout the implementation phase, the easier it is to mitigate any issues already while you're doing it. I know this question is about when it's already too late, but to avoid this, because there can be things like COVID hit, now there's supply chain issues, etc. There are things that can happen that you have no influence on. But the biggest mistake is trying to hide that from the donor and trying to kind of figure it out and say, oh, we can do it. Always keep donors informed of what is happening. And if you see, okay, we cannot reach this milestone because this and this and this, inform the donor, let them know, and keep them close. And even if your project is running amazing, keep them close, keep in touch, and keep them informed, because this is also called donor stewardship. This is what a relationship is, no? And you want to build a relationship with the donor, kind of exchanging experiences and exchanging knowledge about what's happening. A major mistake many NGOs do is they apply, they send a proposal, they win the grant, they're happy, and the next time they communicate with the donor is when they send in the report. But that's so many missed opportunities of networking, making a partner out of that donor and establishing a long-term relationship. And I think that's what you should go after. So yeah, that was my 2 cents for this.
Yeah, reputation is everything, because you maintain a good reputation by being honest. And if something happens that is outside of your control, no donor, they might not like it, but no donor is going to hold you personally as an NGO responsible for things that are outside of your control. If it's something that was within your control, then you better have a good reason. Maybe there was money went missing, or maybe the wrong beneficiaries were targeted, so there was no impact. You made a mistake in your assessment or your programming. Those cases, also honesty is key, because if you're quick in coming clean, if you will, then you can sit with the donor and say, how are we going to adapt? What are we going to do to resolve it, to make sure that we get back on the right track? And donors will appreciate that, because then donors have they're not, like I said, they're not banks. They also have technical expertise. They may work with dozens of NGOs around the world, or hundreds of NGOs around the world. So they may have solutions to the problems of not poor performance, or not targeting the right beneficiaries, etc. So work with them. It's a relationship. They need you, you need them, and treat it like a relationship. And in a relationship, if you're hiding things, or or by omission, maybe, you're not telling the donor what's going on because you're afraid they're going to cut you off or whatever, that's the biggest mistake you can make. I think if you're honest and you can come to some sort of resolution or solve the problem, that's great. And in other cases, you can't. Maybe the donor is unwilling to fund you anymore. They want to work with somebody else who has a better track record. In those cases, you move on, but you still have to be honest, because that donor could ruin your reputation. If other donors, potential donors, see that you were funded by donor A year ago, they may reach out to that donor and ask, hey, how did that go? Or they may ask you, and you would have to tell them honestly that it wasn't a success. So be very careful, and engage and talk it through with the donor. I typically find that highlighting some of the things that didn't work, some of the mistakes you make, that donors very much appreciate that, because they know not everything is going to work out as planned. And they very much want transparency, honesty, etc., and know what's going on at the moment it's going on. So if you do that, the chances of that donor continuing to fund you in the future go up quite significantly. If you paint a rosy picture and then the results a year or 2 years later are actually not that great, when you report on them, it will be it could really create a problem. So sometimes it can be solved, and then you need to go and move on to a new donor, you know, and make sure you don't make the same mistake again. Okay, great. I think, Eva.
Yeah. Thank you so much. These were all great questions. It's always nice to have some more time to answer them and to take a little bit of time for all of these. So we will keep running these Q&A sessions on a regular basis, because I think this is very helpful for everyone, also for us to see what's on your mind, what are the issues that you want to see addressed. That's also very interesting. Yeah, if you do not already, please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of these updates. I've seen in the chat, I think, a couple of comments that some of the YouTube video didn't work, that specific one, but if you go to our channel, you will see the list of all the webinars that we've done in the past year, and I think even further back. So you can click through that and you will definitely find the resources that we have mentioned today. We also have proposals4ngos.com, where you will find articles, resources, samples, etc., that you can download and check out. And yeah, we hope to see you again in our next webinar. And thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And yeah, if you have anything you want to let us know, any story to share, any success stories, please reach out to info@philantropia.org, because we would love to hear those. And it's always really, really nice. I know that I'm going to have a great weekend now, knowing that our work is helping you and is really having an impact. So that's really making me happy on a personal level as well.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you very soon. And
Yeah.
Thanks, Eva, for the great comments and answers. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.